I buy when things are low and no one wants them. I keep them until they go up and people are crazy to get them. American women would be much happier if they learned the principles of business in girlhood. In the 1890s, the robber barons lived like kings. Men like Carnegie and Vanderbilt built gold-plated mansions on Fifth Avenue and threw parties that cost millions. But if you walked down the dark halls of the Chemical Bank in New York, you might see a woman sitting on the floor surrounded by piles of dusty paperwork. She wore a tattered black dress that had faded to a sickly green. She ate oatmeal she warmed up on the bank's radiator to save the price of a restaurant meal. To the neighbors, she was a homeless eccentric. To the press, she was the witch of Wall Street. But when the greatest financial minds in America ran out of money, when the city of New York itself was about to go bankrupt, they didn't go to the government, they went to her. Hetty Green was a woman in a man's world who didn't just play the game, she owned the board. Today, we're looking at how a woman who refused to buy a new dress became the literal lender to the robber barons. Hetty wasn't born into poverty. She was born into a whaling fortune in New Bedford. But while other girls were learning to sew, Hetty's father had her reading financial stock reports to him by the age of 6. By the time she was a teenager, she was doing the family accounting. She learned one rule that would define her life: never owe anyone anything. When her father died, she inherited $7 million. In today's money, that's roughly $250 million. Most women of that era would have handed that money to a husband or a brother to manage. Hetty did the opposite. She married a wealthy man named Edward Green, but she made him sign a prenuptial agreement unheard of in the 1860s, keeping their finances totally separate. When her husband eventually made bad investments and went broke, the bank tried to use Hetty's money to pay his debts. Hetty didn't just say no. She withdrew every cent of her millions, dumped her husband, and moved into a small apartment with her 2 children. She was done with men losing her money.
How did she outsmart the robber barons? It wasn't through complex math. It was through brutal discipline and a level of patience that her male peers simply didn't possess. While the men of Wall Street were gambling on speculative bubbles, fueling the railroad money trap with borrowed cash, Hetty followed a simple, ironclad rule. I buy when things are low and nobody wants them. I keep them until they go up and people are crazy to get them. She was a bottom feeder in the best sense of the word. When the Panic of 1893 hit and the market was screaming in pain, Hetty didn't panic. She walked onto the floor of the Chemical Bank with a list of properties and stocks that were being sold for pennies on the dollar. She bought foreclosed farms in the Midwest, government bonds during the chaos of the Civil War, and railroads that were in total shambles. She was the original value investor decades before Benjamin Graham or Warren Buffett made the strategy famous.
But it was her liquidity that truly made her a titan. While other tycoons like Vanderbilt or Gould had their money tied up in massive yachts, Fifth Avenue mansions, and high-maintenance estates, Hetty kept millions in cold, hard cash. She lived on almost nothing, meaning her burn rate was 0. This gave her the ultimate leverage: time. She could wait out a market crash for 5 years, while her competitors were being forced to sell their assets just to pay their servants. She famously said, "There is no great secret in fortune-making. All you do is buy cheap and sell dear, act with thrift and shrewdness, and then be persistent." Her power peaked during the Panic of 1907. While J.P. Morgan was frantically trying to organize a bailout, Hetty was one of the only individuals with actual usable gold. The city of New York was so desperate to pay its teachers and police officers that they sent a delegation to beg her for a loan. She didn't hesitate, but she didn't do it for charity either. She wrote them a check for $1.1 million and took the city's high-interest revenue bonds as collateral. For a brief moment in history, the greatest city in the world was financially beholden to a woman in a tattered handbag. But YouTube history isn't just about the money, it's about the person. And Hetty was complicated. The stories of her cheapness are legendary. It was said she wouldn't use hot water because it cost too much. She allegedly spent half a night searching her carriage for a lost stamp worth 2 cents. The darkest story involves her son, Ned. When he injured his leg, legend says Hetty dressed him in rags and took him to a free clinic for the poor so she wouldn't have to pay a private doctor. The delay in treatment was so bad that his leg eventually had to be amputated. Whether that story is 100% true or part of the witch myth created by a sexist press, it cemented her image, a woman who loved her ledger more than her own blood. When Hetty Green died in 1916, she left behind an estate worth roughly $100 million. In today's economy, that's nearly $2.5 billion. She was the richest woman in the world, and she did it without the right to vote, without a seat on the stock exchange, and without the respect of her peers. The robber barons hated her because she didn't play by their rules. She didn't buy their scams, she didn't attend their galas, and she was always there to collect interest when they went broke. She proved that in the world of American finance, cash isn't just king, it's a shield. She lived as a ghost in the machine of Wall Street, outliving and out-earning almost every man who ever mocked her black dress. So, the next time you hear about a market crash, remember Hetty. While everyone else is screaming, the smartest person in the room is usually the one sitting quietly, waiting for the price to drop. Today, we live in an era of quiet luxury and flexing on social media, but Hetty Green was the ultimate practitioner of stealth wealth. She understood a truth that many modern investors forget. True power isn't about the house you live in or the car you drive. It's about the FU money you have sitting in the bank when the rest of the world is panicking. She was a woman who was ridiculed by the press, called a witch by her peers, and shunned by high society. Yet she outlived them all, out-earned them all, and left behind a fortune that would make a modern hedge fund manager blush. She proved that in the cold, hard world of American finance, the only thing that matters more than how much you make is how much you keep. Whether she was a financial genius who paved the way for women in business, or a cautionary tale of how greed can rot a soul, one thing is certain: Wall Street has never seen anyone like her since.
Keep your money safe. Never risk what you cannot afford to lose. Anyone who is not prepared to live within his means suffers from a lack of imagination.
I buy Bergens.
I never speculate. I invest. I buy when things are low and nobody wants them. I keep them until they go up and everybody wants them.
If you want to see the scams that Hetty spent her whole life avoiding, you need to watch my video on the Gilded Age scams right here. And if you're curious about how the banking system she conquered eventually evolved into the machine we use today, check out my deep dive on when banks printed their own money. Don't forget to hit the like button if you learned something new today, and subscribe to join us as we unearth the hidden, often dirty history of American money. If you want to see the scams that Hetty managed to avoid, check out my video on the Gilded Age scams. Subscribe for more stories of the people who built and broke the American economy. I'll see you in the next one.